I don't know about you, I don't know when Christmas begins for you, but now tradition seems to say that Christmas actually begins when this bad boy turns up, either on our TV screens or perhaps around the cities around our country. That's what people seem to think, that Christmas begins with a Coca-Cola lorry. Much of what we do at Christmas comes from different traditions that have been passed on from one generation to another, echoes of a Christmas past. All of them with a story, with a message attached to them. Perhaps you'll have traditions, echoes of Christmases past in your family, things that you look forward to, things that you're excited to. There'll be things that will trigger those memories, that echo in your own heart and in your own mind. Perhaps it will be a song that you'll hear, a smell, a taste, a game, a TV program, a place. Different things for different people. Some of those will be amazing. Some of those you'll go, what is that all about? I remember the first time that I had shared Christmas with my wife Claire's family. I was horrified by one of their traditions. Because their tradition was that you open your presents after Christmas dinner, after the Queen's speech. I'd grown up in a family where you rip your presents apart right at the beginning of the day, and then you get the whole of the day to enjoy it. I had to wait until after Christmas lunch in order to begin to enjoy my presents. What was that all about? I wasn't expecting that, that's for sure. And then on top of that, not only do we get delivered all of our presents, then it appears you have to open them one by one. So I have to sit there and watch other people open their presents, and then it's my turn again, and then I have to wait until it all comes round again. Boxing Day evening is when we usually finish unwrapping all of the presents in my wife's family. It's just one of those things. One of the things that triggers it off in my family is a game called Pit. It's a card game. Does anyone play Pit? Yes. It's a violent card game. That's what it is. It's not really a card game. It's a fight. And it's incredibly competitive. But my family love it because we're incredibly competitive. And basically, you have to collect all of these different suits of different kind of crops. That's kind of a farmy kind of thing, I guess. And when you've got the whole of the 8 cards that you're meant to, you do a big shout and everyone else goes like that. Yeah, you won it. And I remember one Christmas, every time we played this game now, I remember my granddad who's now no longer with us. But I remember it got so competitive that he went like this, and then he sat back down with enthusiasm and the chair collapsed underneath him. So every time I think about the game Pit, every time I play the game Pit, I remember seeing my granddad crumpled in a ball on the floor, laughing his heart out in the midst of a family celebration. I wonder what it is for you. The Christmas truce that we've been thinking about and reflecting about today, as you see set out here before you to give you a taste and a flavour, brilliantly mirrored in the Sainsbury's TV advert that you will have seen perhaps many, many, many times. The Christmas truce is one of those historical events that is incredibly powerful, and yet until the centenary year, this year has kind of been forgotten, been pushed to one side. It's a Christmas story that's been resurrected this year. And it's an incredible story, one of hope in the midst of despair and desperation. It took place in the most improbable place, in the settings of mud, cold rain, deep, dark, horrible trenches, and senseless killing in World War I. It happened in spite of orders to the contrary. It happened because it grew from the lower ranks up through, and eventually the officers around began to catch on to the vision of it. It's the first time only in history this has ever happened, where the soldiers themselves turned around the orders of the officers and people began to react in a different way. Spontaneously, people began to arise out of the trenches and begin to move towards one another, bringing a greeting, a celebration, offering gifts, a shake of a hand, an exchange of a conversation, even though they spoke a different language, and temporarily turning sworn enemies into temporary friends. And history records for us that it began with the singing of a carol, the lighting of candles on a Christmas tree, and the singing of a carol. that began in the German trenches, and then it caught and spread as the melody echoed out across the whole of the battlefield. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, silent night, holy night. And as the melody rang out across the battlefield, so the memories began to stir in the hearts of the soldiers dug into those trenches with their feet in water, freezing cold, wondering what this meaningless, purposeless war was really all about. They remembered the story of Christmases past. And so they began to sing, silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild. Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace. How they must have longed that they could do the same. In the midst of the battlefields, that they might know peace, find peace. And in fact, some of them were the instigators of that peace. But the carol goes on to tell us in verse 2 where we can find it. Verse 2 talks about the shepherds quaking as the angels bring the messages you'll have heard from the reading. They bring a message of hope and of good news. That a saviour, a rescuer, has been born. And this rescuer, verse 3, goes on to tell us that as a result of this rescuer coming, of him being born, this person, Jesus, God with us, Emmanuel, the hope has now come into the world. And we see in the Christmas truce the echo of the very first Christmas 2,000 years ago. An echo of a greater hope, an echo of a greater peace, the greatest gift ever given. And Isaiah, hundreds of years before this event took place, foretold that it would happen. He says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. It's exactly what was happening in the battlefields 100 years ago. People walking in great darkness, in despair. Many of us find ourselves at times in a dark place. But here's the amazing good news of the Christmas story. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Not just a light on a Christmas tree, but light of a child, the one that would come. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. Emmanuel, God with us, God with skin on, the Prince of Peace, the one who owns peace, the one who gives peace, the one who brings peace. 100 years ago, on a small section of the battlefield of World War I, temporary peace came. And whilst it didn't last, it did point us forward to a greater peace, a lasting peace that came some 1900 years before, brought by the Prince of Peace. And it's a gift of peace, not just for then, but for now, for you, for me. The hope of peace, the joy of peace in our lives. Sainsbury's advert captures it brilliantly, doesn't it? That moment when that first soldier sticks his head above the parapet, you see it in his face. You hear it in the cries of the other soldiers. No, don't do it. And yet, something for him, something that he wanted to believe in, that this could be a turning point in history, a moment in history when peace could really come, even in the midst of despair and hopelessness. He not only longed for something better, he put faith into action. He put legs on it. And he climbed up the ladder and he stepped out of the trenches and he walked towards his enemies. And in that small section, they began to greet and meet one another. You see, peace is something we all long for. It's not just in the trenches, not just in the war-torn areas of our world that we see on our TV screens, but in our communities, don't we? In our families. There may be moments over Christmas when you'll long for peace and you'll take yourself off to a quiet room to find peace. There's times when we personally long for peace. When the world seems a dark place, a hopelessness begins to cloud over us. But here's the amazing news. In the midst of darkness, a light has dawned. The Prince of Peace has come and is as real and relevant today as he was 2,000 years ago. How will we know? We'll follow the example of that first soldier. If we believe that there is something better, if we believe that peace is available to us, if we believe that maybe, just maybe, the Prince of Peace brings peace, then we put legs on it. We take a step of faith. And only in that moment will we experience the joy of peace in our lives. The echo of God's amazing, unconditional love. The greatest gift that unwrapped brings lasting peace and great hope.